the sheer number of times a camera move is accompanied by like a whoosh or super serious boom sound in this movie is just insane. And I think it would be excusable or even like really enjoyable if that were only used like a handful of tasteful times in the movie. But the movie overuses that trick so frequently that it makes the movie's style impossible to disregard. You have to acknowledge it, which is one of the reasons that Bound feels like two filmmakers who are striving to be noticed.
Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we continue Genre Romance Month with Bound, the debut film from the Wachowskis. This was a first watch for both Travis and I, and one I'd always been curious about, but had been stayed pretty ignorant of. And I gotta say, actually, this is an instance where I wish I had known a little bit more about the movie before going into it.
Yeah, because I think both you and I had some sort of amorphous idea of what the movie was.
Preconceived notions. I totally admit to having incorrect preconceived notions about what this movie was.
Totally. Same here. And that's no fault of the movies. It's just sort of our fault because we've only really got an idea of what this movie was because of osmosis, you know?
We made an assumption, and you know what happens with that. Made an ass out of you and me. So
that's right.
That's on us. And I think, because I'll say without spoiling anything, when we got to the end of the movie, you had said, I think watching that again, now that I know what it is, I'd have a different read on it. Or at least a better read. And I feel kind of the same way, because we went in, it's like, oh, well, this has been known just as the lesbian erotic romance thriller starring Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly.
Yeah, and I had heard it was stylish because it kind of put the Wachowskis on the map in a certain sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's their directorial debut.
Yeah.
They had done other script writing stuff, but this was their debut. And in some ways, it's a very expected kind of debut from this era of film.
Yeah, this is when Tarantino sort of held sway over a lot of what was going on in low budget and independent cinema. There was like a sort of like Sundance Babies generation.
I was just going to say, this is part of that Sundance cool.
Yes, totally agreed. You know, there are some influences from that Sundance cool in the first season of Sopranos, for instance, which this, again, shares some sort of common blood with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's something that I think people's mileage will vary. For this particular movie, it seems that this element of it seems to be accepted pretty well. People really, really like this movie. And I think it's because it's taking a smaller story and doing big movie things with it.
It also should be said that it was incredibly bold for the time.
Oh, for sure. I mean, here's the thing. Part of the reason we wanted to do this for romance was it's like, well, we would like to have a non-heterosexual romance in the month, and this seemed like a good contender. And that is a core of the movie, but there's something else going on in Bound that really takes over the movie after a certain point.
Yeah.
And the romance really takes a back seat.
Yeah, like if you just look at the setup of this movie from the first act, there's a little bit of a flash forward thing that reveals sort of like what is going to happen to one of the characters, particularly Gina Gershon's character, Corky. And that casts the entire first act in a certain light. Because you're thinking, okay, well, I know where this is going to end up eventually. How is it going to get there? So it casts suspicions on Jennifer Tilly's character.
Well, this is a typical, and I think this is something that a lot of screenwriting has actually gotten away from. I mean, infamously, it's been made fun of in Rick and Morty, is the idea of starting your story with a flash forward and doing a,
6 weeks earlier.
Yeah. Whatever kind of thing that has kind of gotten out of fashion. But for a spec script, and especially one in the 90s, there was an expectation that you will be able to grab whatever bloated executive's assistant is reading your script, because on page one, it's like, and it opens with a baby like falling down a waterfall.
Yeah, like a really shocking image, and so it's gonna keep that reader reading.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're seeing similar trends in screenwriting today. Like there's this whole phenomenon in screenwriting now called the Blacklist, which was this site made by Franklin Leonard where you can get your script reviewed. Your spec scripts, you can submit them to like these anonymous reviewers at the Blacklist, and they'll tell you what they think of it. And then they have connections in Hollywood.
Well, and because that's become a thing now. Is every year the Blacklist posts the best unproduced screenplays, and it's
and you look at them and you're like, man, that's fucking corny as fuck. And usually when you read them, you're like, okay, this was a screenplay, like not necessarily designed to be a movie, but designed to get script readers' eyes like on the page and like invested.
Yes, I mean it's to get jobs more so than to get movies made.
Correct.
But from that, it's like I can't remember what year it was, but it's like that Wonka prequel movie that Timothée Chalamet's making. It's like that was on the Blacklist one year.
I don't think it's the same screenplay because
it's not. Okay. The point being that Bound opens and has the flow of one of those particular kinds of spec scripts
from the era. Yeah.
Yeah, from that era. I mean, Travis and I are suckers for a legit title sequence. This has one. It's almost like a Batman opening, Batman 89.
Yeah, where they actually build the word bound as a physical object, and then they shoot it from really cool angles on a soundstage, and then they shine lights at it, and it's like textured concrete. Looks really cool. Yeah. And then Don Davis's score is immediately strong, like really, really rich scoring in this opening sequence. Like where I'm not even talking about its presence in the movie proper, but just in this opening sequence, you're like, this is a pretty strong score. It makes me miss Don Davis.
This is kind of a big overall read on the movie without getting into too many specifics. And it's because of this Don Davis comment is like, Don Davis is doing everything he can to make this feel like a way bigger movie than it is.
Because it's super small. I mean, the scope of the movie is just eensy weensy.
I mean, there's a point where you sent a message to me, and I was having the exact same thought of like, this is like a stage play.
Yeah.
Like the as written as a premise and how these things are going down, this is a stage play kind of story, but the movie does not want to be looked at as a stage play. It wants to be the most dynamic version of this four walls and a door kind of story.
Right. It really wants to be, at least in the first act, it kind of like, wants to establish itself as a bigger story that takes place in this sort of like grunge, neo-noir Chicago. So from the way the first act unfolds, we had expectations of what the movie was going to be in its second and third acts. And it turns out the movie was not that. So in some ways, kudos to the Wachowskis for keeping us guessing, but also that first act set up some expectations for us as to like what we could look forward to. And then when the movie didn't deliver on those things, I think maybe you and I were a little let down, but that's actually not so much a read on the movie as it is a read on like, oh, okay.
Well, what we expected from it, like what we went going in with.
Yeah. If we watch this a second time, we'll know what to expect and probably have a better time with the flick.
Yeah. Because the first act really is this like, okay, Corky is a recently released ex-con who has gotten a job working in this apartment. She's living in this apartment, but to clean it out.
Yeah, she's there to like fix up the plumbing and stuff like that. And
and
Jennifer Tilly's character
Violet
and her perhaps boyfriend, yes, Violet and Caesar, played by Jennifer Tilly and Joe Pantoliano, live next door. And one of the first things we hear from those two is Corky is able to hear them having sex through the wall. And this goes on to inform. They have an interaction on the elevator.
Yeah, they have an interaction. But even before that, it's like as soon as Corky and Violet see each other, they're making eyes. They're being framed as like there is silent language going on between the two of them in the language of attraction,
right?
And specifically in how movies portray attraction.
Well, and the cinematic language tells us these two aren't done with each other yet. Something's going to happen between these two. Mm-hmm. This isn't just a fleeting moment. Like this is an important thing. And the score and the cinematography and the performances and the editing all tell us that. So Corky, while she fixes up all the pipes in this apartment, she overhears Violet and Caesar having sex. So of course she starts to make some assumptions about what their relationship is like. Corky one day goes over to Violet and Caesar's apartment at Violet's request. She's like, oh, I dropped a piece of jewelry down the drain. Can you like help me get it out? And immediately it's apparent that the movie is having fun making fun of professional pornography plot tropes. Like, ooh, Mr. Man, can you come over and fix the pipes?
I mean, this predates porn.
Well, it predates a lot of porn, certainly, but like that whole like, can you fix the pipes thing has been around in porn for decades before.
Well,
this.
I mean, yeah, not just porn, but I mean, this is pulp erotica. Like, it goes further back than actual what we consider, you know, mainstream pornography. It's like, yes, like having the person, any service person that comes over to see the lonely woman alone in her mansion.
Right.
It's like this is a thing that tons of pulp erotica stories, you know, use as their jumping off point.
And there has to be a third in that social dynamic equation. And the third in this case is Joe Pantoliano, because it makes it naughtier that, you know, Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon's characters are getting away with something.
Right. It's an affair.
Yes.
And you know, the Wachowskis have said that they were really taking a lot of stuff from like Billy Wilder's noir filmography. So obviously Double Indemnity, like, hangs over this movie. It's not my shelf pick, but
also The Apartment. I mean, come on.
The Apartment, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, literally, like, it's so, you know, that's very clearly the influences that they're playing with here. And in that first act where it's like, okay, well, it's all going to be about Corky and Violet clearly having an attraction to each other. But because of the opening image in which we see Corky bound together in a closet and beat up, immediately Jennifer Tilly's actions are suspect. And we know that they're suspect because she clearly manufactured an entire, like, oops, my earring dropped off. Can you come and get, it's like,
right. She's already proven herself to be dishonest.
Yes. To be manipulative.
Yeah. It seems clear to you and I at this point that's like, okay, there is an intention in the filmmaking to portray Violet as untrustworthy. But then, you know, after we establish that Violet wants to get out of this abusive relationship with Caesar, a man she doesn't love and considers, you know, basically, you know, her relationship is like sex work to her. It's something that she, not necessarily that she enjoys, but she's good at it and can tolerate it. And, you know, it helps her survive, but she wants a clean break. She wants to get out and she needs money to do it. So that's the big plot.
She reveals that she's having sex with at least one other man and is being paid to do it. And so when Corky and her are having this flirtation and they have sex, when Violet has sex with this man, Corky is offended. She's like, oh, you're lying to me. You actually, you know, do like men and stuff. And Violet says, like, that wasn't sex.
Yeah.
Like, that was work. That's her line.
There is a bit of grounding in the sort of like lesbian bar scene in Act 1 where we see Gina Gershon's character, Corky, go to a lesbian bar and sort of like get a sense of like who these characters are and, you know, establish at least a scene. Like it's not so much as talking about real lesbians and what it's like for actual real human beings who identify that way as it is like, okay, this is our movie's idea of this like scene and how we're going to do it. And whether or not that's constructed in an offensive way is really not my place to say. I can't be offended on anybody's behalf.
I don't give a shit about that. Like what I care about is that regardless of their gender or sexual orientation, this is just very clear, tried and true dynamics writing.
Sure.
Which is that like, okay, yes, like Corky's looking for love, but isn't finding it and then finds it with Violet, and you could replace them. It could be two men. It could be a man and a woman. The dynamic remains the same. Something I really liked about Bound and something that it was celebrated for at the time was that the two characters being gay was not what the movie was about.
Right. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, is like they were told that their budget would be much lower if Corky was a woman.
Yes.
But if they made Corky into a man, they would actually get more money to make the movie. Now, I'm glad that Wachowski stuck to their guns on this. And, you know, I'm glad that they stick to their guns on pretty much anything they did or have done. But it's easy to see if you remove certain elements from Act 1 that Corky could be just an easily gender swapped character. You know, if you remove the lesbian bar stuff from the first act, and if you remove the conversations about like, you know, her lesbian identity and judging Jennifer Tilly's character for having sex with men, you know, if you take that stuff out, Corky could easily be a male character. But the fact that Corky isn't a male character is extraordinarily important to the fabric of the film and what makes it unique. And one of the reasons we're talking about it right now.
Well, it's also, I mean, it would take away from Gina Gershon's performance. Gina Gershon's very good in this movie.
Excellent. Excellent in this movie.
And it's not it's not, you know, because it's like, oh, she's playing a great lesbian. It's like, no, she's like playing a good character.
Yes.
Like that's what's working. And yes, like her sexual orientation does come into that at some point during the discussions, but it is not the focal point of the movie. This isn't really a movie about like the gay lesbian experience. Like, this isn't about lesbians being ostracized from society. It's like, no, the Wachowskis clearly wanted to tell a very well-worn type of noir crime story, but instead of having a man and a woman in the lead, they wanted two women. And it's like,
right.
Because that apocryphal story you're talking about, they came back with saying like, well, that movie's been made 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
Like it being two women hasn't. And
right.
It's like,
that is,
cool.
That is part of the novelty and the selling point of Bound.
Yeah. And clearly it's been one of the biggest sticking points of the movie because it created those preconceived notions that we went into the movie with.
Yeah. And the movie knows why we're, you know, in some instances, like showing up to see this kind of stuff where it's like, yeah, Jennifer Tilly, gorgeous person. Gina Gershon, gorgeous person. Is a romance between the two of them on screen titillating in concept? Absolutely. Is it titillating in execution? Incredibly so. That close-up shot between the two of their mouths as they're about to kiss, like really hot. And just a beautiful shot, you know, gorgeously lit too.
The dynamic filmmaking of the Wachowskis is absolutely made foundational in Bound, because when we have the first sex scene, I think it's the only full sex scene between Corky and Violet, it is this big swooping epic oneer of a shot that's like, this is like the kind of shit James Cameron was thinking about when he's like, all right, I want this big full 360 look at the Titanic.
Yeah.
It's like,
well,
it's for a sex
clear,
scene.
you know, and it was clearly choreographed. I believe I read a piece of trivia on this that they had brought in someone to specifically choreograph this as a lesbian love scene. And so they had that thought put into it. And I mean, if the movie's intention is to titillate, it's doing it. It's absolutely doing it.
But then the second act kicks in, and it's a pretty hard line of differentiating between the beginning of this movie and the middle.
Yeah. And it's structurally, it's a long first act because like in retrospect, I look at it, I'm like, okay, the whole first act and setup and like establishment of character dynamics is pretty much entirely from Corky's perspective. And so I think you and I got really used to this idea of Corky as the central perspective character and being really invested in her story. And then also not being able to trust what's going on with Jennifer Tilly. And that created a little bit of like frustration, like, I don't, you know, we seem to know where we're going. And I don't really like this dynamic of like not being able to trust Jennifer Tilly because it means the romance isn't like rapturous. We're not able to fall in love with it, you know, immediately. We're immediately kind of put at a distance. And the fact that the perspective switches a fair ways into the movie, like once they establish what the plot is of like, oh, there's going to be a heist. You know, we're going to get some of this mob money and we're going to use it to, you know, get out of town. You know, Jennifer Tilly's character is going to use it to dump Caesar and disappear basically. And it's like, okay, yeah, I want that for this character. You know, if she truly wants it for herself, I want that for her too. And I want her and Gina Gershon to end up together if Violet is indeed telling the truth. But, you know, again, the movie wants to put us at a distance and saying it's not going to, you know, tell us that Violet is being truthful, at least not yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know looking back if there was full intention of making Violet suspicious or if that just kind of if that just happened in performance, you know, between Jennifer Tilly and how she was directed to make certain looks or deliver certain lines and stuff.
I think the Wachowskis would have known that we were lacking as an audience all the information that would let us trust Violet.
But more so when that shift happens in perspective where not only the romance gets kind of put on the back burner, Corky as a character, like you said, the perspective shift means that she gets kind of put on the back burner because we learn all of this like mob lore about like, okay, Caesar works for these people and here's their hierarchy. And of course, the heir to the throne of this mob hierarchy is a loose cannon. That's a trope that has been beaten into the ground. Thankfully, that loose cannon's played by Chris Meloni, who for his short amount of screen time may fucking steal the movie.
Yeah, he makes an incredible impression because he's fucking Chris Meloni. He plays Johnny, and Johnny is the son of Gino, who is played by Richard Sarafian, who's the guy who directed Vanishing Point. So Gino is coming over from Italy. There's going to be some exchange of money. There's a suitcase with $2 million in it. The specifics of it is something that the movie gets hung up on for too long, frankly.
It just has characters having to go. It's like, you mean Mario Calzone, the leader of the Calzone crime family?
Yeah. It's just for scenes, like for 3 or 4 scenes, it's like, okay, yeah, it doesn't really matter all the specifics of this. I know that the Wachowskis like thought all this out, but it doesn't really fucking matter all that much.
Yeah.
All that matters is like, there's a suitcase full of $2 million. Violet wants it, and Corky's going to help her get it. And Caesar is the big variable of like, what is going to like, how do we get around Caesar?
Well, he's the mark in a lot of senses in this, is that he's the one that they need to fool with a con to be able to pull the heist off.
Yeah.
Like, he's the security guard.
So the setup basically is like, they're going to make Caesar believe that Johnny, played by Christopher Meloni, has snuck into the apartment and stolen the $2 million while Caesar was out. And so that was something that they try to establish, when in reality, Corky has used her lockpicking tools to break open the case, steal the money, put the money in a trash bag, and then hide the trash bag in a big plastic bucket of white paint in the empty apartment next door.
Minor note: this is also when the movie really starts to kick off. It's like, oh, this is a Wachowskis movie.
The style is like, whoa.
Well, one of the parts of that is that when you talk about, it's revealed very curtly in dialogue that like Corky has some kind of criminal past. She had some other criminal partner that screwed her in some way, and so she has some kind of background in criminal affairs, which allows her to be like a good lockpick. And there's an image. They do the stereotypical heist thing of, I'm going to explain to you the plan in voiceover, and while I'm explaining the plan in one scene, we're seeing the plan play out in real time. That's a classic. It's
a common trope of heist sequences, yes. And for good reason, because it works. It's actually way more expedient that way.
Well, sure. But within that montage of that sequence, we see Corky putting on earrings, and it's her different parts of her lockpick set. And that's an image that I'm like, that is a very Wachowskis being comic book dork, like inspirations kinds of images, where it's like, fun. It's super. It's something that's really kind of over the top, but perfect. Like it's working for this over the top dilemma that they've created about how do we get the money.
Yeah. I liked that little detail a lot. That was pretty cool.
There's a part of me that wishes the movie wasn't on that kind of over the top level, both in concept and in stylistic execution in the filmmaking, because like we said, this is a really small movie. And I think its attempt to puff its chest out and seem like a bigger potential Hollywood thing than it actually is. I mean, it's clearly the thing that got the Wachowskis a career and has continued on throughout their films. But I think it also kind of, I don't know, that there's something about it. And maybe again on rewatch, I wouldn't be as attuned to this, but there's something I'm like, I wish the execution of the movie reflected the scale of the story we're dealing with.
Yeah. So here's how this manifests. So once we get into like the scenes where they're talking about, the setup of the heist and all this sort of stuff, and the character dynamics between Violet and Corky, there will be dialogue scenes between Violet and Corky where every camera push and every look has an associated whoosh or boom on the soundtrack. And it's like, folks, what are we doing? Like, I understand that this kind of stuff was new at the time.
Well, you say new, it was new to American audiences. This is a lot of that like HK influence.
Yeah.
Like coming up, which of course I'm sure the Wachowskis were aware of the HK revolution that happened in the 80s and into the 90s. And there's big sequences of that where it's like, oh yeah, they want a big dynamic head turn from a character and put a whoosh sound effect because subconsciously people will think, wow, something big and important's really happening right now because film language has taught me to feel that way about these things. But really a character's turning their head. I can't say for certain if it's affected the movie's aging in a totally negative way. It's just something that it also just feels like, man, this is super Sundance 90s.
It also gets to a point where it's funny. And I don't think the movie necessarily intended that, but now I think with age, it has become pretty funny. Like once you realize like just how frequently they use that trick, it's like, this is silly.
Well, and the other thing about it, and we love Don Davis, his scores for the Matrix movies are absolute classics, but Don Davis goes full ham.
The Don Davis knob is cranked to 11.
To a point where I was laughing at the movie. And that's it. Like I was laughing at the movie, which I don't like doing.
Yeah, there was. I was thinking of a review I read for 10 Cloverfield Lane. The review I read of it said the score was very insistent. I'm like, well, motherfucker, you can't just say the score is insistent. You have to say what it's insisting upon. But then I was thinking about Bound and Don Davis's score, and I'm like, yeah, this is a very insistent score. It's insisting that the movie is like really big, when in reality it's like a stage play.
Well, I mean, it's like, two characters will be running down a hallway, and it's like, yeah, you can have suspenseful music and something that elevates that so we feel the tension more in the music. But he scores it like the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah,
like it's the biggest event that has ever happened in narrative or human history.
It becomes like operatically huge, which is comedic.
Yeah, which does not fit with what we're actually experiencing in the story and on the screen. So it's like the score is not a bad score removed of itself, but it feels just like the movie through the filmmaking. It feels like it's trying to get noticed too. Like, look, we can make a big Hollywood sounding score for this little tiny crime story movie.
It really does seem like, from a filmmaking standpoint or from an artistic standpoint, that the filmmakers were putting so much effort into getting this noticed. Like, this isn't some dinky student film. It's not an indie that you might find at Sundance that has a bad temp score and that might get, picked up for distribution by the Weinsteins, and they'll say, oh, put a new score in it or whatever. No, this is like a fully formed fucking movie, motherfucker. Like, this is ready to rock your ass off. And that level of insistence and like polish on it, I think, is overdone in a lot of respects. But does it affect the movie really, really negatively? No.
I mean, obviously this movie trying to be noticed worked in a lot of fields. I mean, obviously Jennifer Tilly.
Also, it got the Wachowskis the fucking Matrix.
It got them the point where they could make the Matrix, but someone we've only mentioned, but we have to talk about because I did not even know he was in the movie, is Joe Pantoliano. Joey Pants steals the movie.
He does, yeah.
Which, is so funny because my preconceived notions, I didn't even know he was in this. It's like, oh, it's the Jennifer Tilly, Gina Gershon movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're very good. Like, and I think Gershon's great in this. Jennifer Tilly's very, very good and doing her Jennifer Tilly thing to a T. And I adore Jennifer Tilly and pretty much will watch anything she's in.
Same.
But Joe Pantoliano is doing some of his career best work. And granted, it's for a super stereotypical role.
Well, the cool thing I love about Joey Pants' performance in this is that it is not a one-note performance. It starts off as one thing where you're like, yeah, this guy is a fucking mark. He's a dumb mobster thug who launders money for the mob, and he's going to be easily duped. Yeah. And you think, yeah, he might be an easy one-note character, but there is an evolution to his character as he becomes more and more unhinged throughout the movie, and he ascends to become this like really fantastic villain for the film. And he does such a great job of it that he actually steals quite a bit of focus from Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly's characters. He becomes like the thing to watch in the movie as he becomes so unhinged. Meanwhile, Gina Gershon's character is next door in the apartment just listening to all of this for like a solid 40-minute section of the movie. And I'm like,
big stretch, whatever it is, it's a big stretch.
It's painful in some regards because I'm like, I really liked Corky's perspective in Act 1 and it's gone. She's got her ear to the wall listening to all this unfold.
She's turned into the audience, which is not what, like, she was not an audience proxy character originally. She was an individual character that, yes, we were following, but that, did not just act as a proxy for our viewing. And for that big section where they're trying to pull off essentially the heist, and then the mobsters are going to come over and they have to play it a certain way. And Caesar has changed up what they thought he was going to do, because they thought he would just try and run away, and they could pin it on him. All this kind of, this is all talked about during the big heist plotting dump thing, where it's like, oh boy, okay, this feels like homework right now.
Yeah. And eventually there becomes this incredibly bloody, string of murders where Joe Pantoliano's like, well, if I can't get out of this situation, I'll just kill everybody. And then when the cops show up, I'll kill them too. It becomes this like giant, like, well, how tall is this pile of bodies you're going to sit on, Joe Pantoliano? Like, he just becomes more and more unhinged. And from a plot standpoint, it's expected, but like, what is the unexpected delight is Joe Pantoliano's performance.
It's great. I mean, it's funny. It's scary.
Yeah.
There's moments when I legit feel bad for Caesar, which I could not believe, because it's like, this guy is just built to be,
because he's such a putz. He's such a schmuck, man.
And he's just an ass, and he overestimates his own worth, and
yeah,
all this kind of stuff. But Joey Pants plays him so well. And it's funny that he's
got the fucking Ralphie hair from Sopranos, man.
Well, yeah. I was just gonna say, it's funny because Ralphie does feel like just the natural extension of Johnny after a point. Ralphie's not quite this crazy, but
you mean Caesar? He's like, Ralphie's like the natural extension of Caesar.
Yes. Ralphie has his same issues, but Caesar goes to a place, and same thing with Chris Meloni in his performance, where I'm like, yeah, this is the Wachowskis being totally cool with over the top wackiness, like in concept and performance. Like, these don't need to come across as, quote, real gangsters. These are freaking movie gangsters. So why not play them that way?
That moment after Caesar shoots Johnny, and it is taking Johnny's dead body, and like he's grabbed him by the collar, and he's like, and he's yelling into his face, and Chris Meloni has to play dead while Joey Pants is like shouting like 2 inches away from his face. It's a great fucking moment.
Chris Meloni gets a great dying line, because Caesar unloads a revolver into him, and he stands there for a little bit, Chris Meloni all shot up, and when he falls down, he just goes, "Don't shoot."
Yeah. It's very funny.
It's funny. Like, there is a good sense of the over the topness and the dark humor that's going on in here. And the Wachowskis nail it. And so do the actors. Like, it's a really, everything's working in sync. And then this is where the movie takes off, where it's like, all right, we're off and running. Bad things are happening. Oh no, the cops are showing up because they thought they heard gunfire. So we have to have that Hitchcock scene of, are they going to find the bomb under the seat?
Right.
So I enjoyed this, bound going in this direction that I did not expect. I wish the opening of the movie was not there, and they continue to flash back to the image of Gina Gershon bound up in the closet, because I would have liked that to been a legit surprise.
Yeah.
That's, it's like, oh man, because then I would have felt even more peril for the characters at that point. So then it just becomes the, like, how the fuck do we get away from Caesar movie?
Mm-hmm.
And that last stretch, that's fun. I had so much fun with that part of the movie.
But it also puts a lot of the central performance, or a lot of the central focus, on Caesar himself, where it really should be doing a better job of centering Corky and Violet in those scenes. And I feel like it loses that a bit.
Yeah, I would say by the time we get to where the movie kind of resolves, and that, like, yes, their romance was genuine and supported on both sides, and they actually are trying to run away together. It's like, I think you abandoned that for a significant enough chunk in the movie that it doesn't land as well as it should.
Agreed. Yeah. And, this whole, like, Hitchcocky and, suspense thriller in the apartment about the $2 million that lasts for such a big chunk of the movie. Like, if I had known that's where the movie would go, or if the first act had kind of been doing a good job of setting that up and like leading me to that point, I think I would have had a much better time with the movie overall. And that's not to say this is a bad movie. It's just a movie that is a little unwieldy in terms of structure.
No, I think this is a perfectly good movie.
Yeah.
Like, I think obviously going from this to The Matrix is like, oh my gosh, you went from making a really good showcase for being filmmakers to making a fucking masterpiece.
Well,
Like-
the cool thing about it is like Don Davis obviously stuck around to score The Matrix, and it's like his score in The Matrix is just as big as it was in Bound, but
Yes.
this time the Wachowskis got to make a movie that actually measures up to how big the score is.
Sure.
It's pretty great.
I mean, you know, they brought Joey over again for The Matrix, and thank God, because Cypher's one of the best characters in that world.
Oh yeah.
You know, and Bound, I'm so glad I finally got around to seeing it, because it has always been a curiosity, but my curiosity was totally tamped down by my own preconceived notions. I was like, well, people probably talk about it because it's like two hot actresses being hot together. And especially in the 90s, you could sell a movie on that.
Showgirls.
Wild Things. You know, so that was always my like the Wachowskis probably did something mildly interesting, but it's known for its titillation. Whereas the fact that I've never heard anybody even mention Joey Pants in this fucking movie before I saw it, you know, that's on me. It's like I didn't look at the cast or, you know, do enough reading about what it was to even know he was in the movie. But he shows up and is like you said, he's so good that he's stealing the spotlight away from the two female leads. And that probably shouldn't be happening, but I was kind of happy when it was happening because he was so good.
Yeah, I can't argue with just how good he is and how compelling the movie is when it focuses on him. But I wish, you know, that the central concept of like, oh, this is about these two women. It's like, I kind of wish the movie hadn't forgotten about that for as long as it did.
I wish there was a better triangle dynamic between the three of them. There really isn't.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, yes, Corky gets sidelined on her own, and so it's like, oh, then the Corky Violet thing's happening, but it's like, yeah, but there isn't like a Corky, like they get like one or two interactions. One of them being when Corky and Violet are getting frisky in Violet's apartment,
and Caesar comes home.
I think that's the first time he meets her.
Yes, and then later on when he sees Corky, he's like, "You."
Well, yes, but the thing being that when he gets there, he immediately thinks that Violet's cheating on him with a guy. And then when it's revealed that it's Corky, he's like, oh, hey, sorry about that. Like, I wouldn't assume that you'd be cheating on my girlfriend. It's like, oh, that's fun, showing that he's a dope. Like, he doesn't know what the score is.
He's such a putz, man.
Yeah. But that's it. So there isn't like enough. So by the ending, when Caesar is going off on Corky, it's like, this doesn't feel really super earned. Like, they didn't have the only establishing relationship they had was that Caesar gave her some money basically to say like, hey, you know what the score is here. I'm connected. Take this money. This is essentially, you know, to keep your mouth quiet about the business I do, you know, that beat. But that's it. So it's like, yeah, there isn't really a good triangle dynamic between these characters like you have in something like The Apartment. So Bound is absolutely, it's kind of a picture perfect debut movie in the sense that it is flawed. It like a debut movie in some ways should not be perfect out of the gate. It should have some kind of like, well, these are especially one that has such creative control, you know, by the filmmaker, like in this sense, the Wachowskis.
Sure. The same is true of another Sundance darling like Clerks. It's like, this is a clearly deeply flawed, dinky movie, but there's like commercial potential here. Clearly.
Well, there's also like there is clear vision. Like this comes from a creative mind.
Yeah, there's a clear voice and a clear vision. You know, the clarity of those two things is there, and that's very promising.
And I think Bound absolutely delivers on that, warts and all. Like it's a perfectly good movie that like I said, I'm glad I finally got around to seeing it. And in some ways, I'm glad it wasn't the movie I was expecting. It legitimately surprised me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be surprised, and I think this is a movie that I'll definitely watch again someday.
Yeah, I can see a rewatch of this in my future for sure.
Yeah.
But I think now we can head over to the shelf where we pick some movies that act as good pairings or sometimes substitutes for our main topic. And we encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf pick, because the shelf is a collaborative effort that we're building together at the GenreVision Movie Club. And if you leave a shelf pick, we will feature it on next week's show. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Bound?
The movie I'm pulling off the shelf this week is something I saw when it was released on VOD like 11 years ago and have not revisited, but I remember it fondly. It is the movie Extraterrestrial, written and directed by Nacho Vigalondo. There is kind of a similar setup here, except the big thing is that it's all taking place under a city in Spain where a big UFO is just hovering in the sky. That's like the big sci-fi thing that's going on that's like freaking people out. So, but this whole idea of like a love triangle inside of an apartment complex where there's a smoking hot woman that draws the attention of the protagonist, and there's the boyfriend character, and there's some like suspense stuff that happens where there's this romance happening surreptitiously. I was really reminded of how Extraterrestrial recalled Hitchcock, particularly stuff like 39 Steps and Rope in its suspense stuff, and Bound does a lot of the same stuff. So I was reminded of Extraterrestrial. Haven't seen it in like 11 years and would be eager to revisit it. It just, even just watching it between you and me or something like that. And I figured I might as well recommend it to folks who may not have seen it before. So, that's all I got for the shelf. What are you pulling off?
I mean, you said it. If you want another story about two gay people committing a crime in a movie that feels like it should be a stage play, Rope, 1943, Alfred Hitchcock. Obviously, Rope and Bound, just you got to put those together.
Yes,
it's the titling alone makes it an easy shelf pick. I really like Rope. It also like Bound feels like an experiment to get noticed, because famously Rope was shot with as few single takes as possible, to the point where this is super nerdy behind the scenes knowledge, but at the time, the reel that they could film on, I think the time limit was 10 minutes that they could film one continuous piece of film. And so Hitchcock pretty much shoots the movie in a bunch of around 10-minute oneers.
Yeah, that's how much he could fit in a mag.
So that was part of the experiment. The story of Rope being that it's a Leopold and Loeb ripoff, of which there were plenty after that case came out, and some pretty good ones too, in which these two men, who they can't say they're gay in 1943, but they are gay. It is very heavily inferred that they are lovers, have killed somebody just to prove that they could pull it off. And they have stashed, I can't remember if it's just they obviously have the rope, but I think the corpse is in there too. Is it just the rope? I forget. Remember.
It's been so long since I've seen it.
Yeah. I think the body is in the room at some point, maybe, but obviously the big thing being that the murder weapon, the rope, is almost in plain sight. And they're throwing like a dinner party to try and prove it's like, oh, we, could get away with it and people could just be walking around here. Rope is good. I've only seen it the one time when I was going through a big Hitchcock phase, and I remember enjoying it, but it's clearly time for me to revisit it because I can't even remember if the body is. I think that's the whole idea, is that the body is sitting in the middle of this room while they're having a dinner party, and nobody knows because it's hidden in the coffee table or whatever.
Could be one for a good verses episode for the show. So
yeah, not bad.
Keep an ear out for that.
Watch more classic Hitchcock, because there's a reason he was as well known as he was. He made really good movies, and Rope is one of them. But now we will head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Peggy Sue Got Married. T-Bones McRoanoke went with Moonstruck, which you just watched for the first time, didn't you?
I did just watch that, and I was inspired to do so because of the whole Nick Cage thing. So our Patreon folks will hear more about my thoughts on Moonstruck later this month.
Stephen Esbella went with Hot Tub Time Machine, which I remember actually enjoying to my surprise.
I think I watched it. Yeah, I watched it.
I remember the running gag of how is Crispin Glover going to lose his arm being quite funny.
The only thing I remember from it is the stupid energy drink being called Chernobyl. That's the only thing I remember from that movie.
I don't remember that. Mr. Milksteak went with The Family Man, which I've never seen, but that's the infamous, where's that chocolate cake? I want that cake movie. That was one of whatever 10,000 Nicolas Cage memes at a point.
The Family Man and The Weatherman are one movie in my head. I know
I've seen The Weatherman.
I know that one of them is a Gore Verbinski movie.
That's The Weatherman.
Okay.
The Family Man, there's some magic. I think Don Cheadle's an angel or something, and it's kind of
word.
It's a little Wonderful Lifey where it's like, oh, if I could go back and do this, yada, yada, yada. And then Mr. Milkshake also went with a French film called La Belle Époque from 2019, which I don't know what that is. So I'm completely ignorant about it. But that, hey, I got to look it up after this. Pale Fire went with the movie Dream a Little Dream, which I believe is a Two Coreys movie. Eric Johnson went with Pleasantville, which I need to revisit. I saw that when it first hit video and remember really liking it, but have not seen it since.
I rewatched it a couple years ago. It held up. I mean, it's very simple. It's very much like these 50s sitcom people are going to discover liberalism.
Right. Well, it's just another, I mean, in relation to Peggy Sue Got Married, it's another like, hey, guess what? The nostalgia thing that you're thinking of, not quite as good as you remember.
Sure. I remember Pleasantville being pretty good.
Yeah, I would be interested to revisit that. And Eric Fuchs went with Valley Girl, which was the breakout Nicolas Cage performance. And Valley Girl, I've always been on the fence about watching because I've been intrigued by it, but I also am like, if it's just like the most 80s thing, I think it will annoy me. And that's on me. That's not on the movie. Like, but I don't know. I'm not. I could very easily be swayed to watching Valley Girl. Now we do have some calls to action, but stick around because Travis and I are going to talk about Ghostbusters Afterlife and the new Jean-Pierre Jeunet movie that you can watch right now on Netflix. And this week we get to celebrate big time because we have 2 new reviews that have gone up on the Apple Podcast Store. The first one comes from robztv.com, who says, Pig, perceptive, informed, grounded, 5 stars. I look forward to this podcast, which happens to release just in time for the hour-long walk to my weekly improv jam session. The host's enthusiasm for cinema is contagious and somehow sets a creative mood that gets me stoked to rock out. Hell yeah.
Fuck yes.
Their analysis is insightful and informed by having already watched more movies than I ever will, and I appreciate the depth and breadth of their scholarship. They stay on topic, but enhance their takes with encyclopedic cross-referencing to other films. I feel like I'm learning not only about the film at hand, but cinematic technique in general, and even how to get more out of movies, whether high, low, or in between. It's time well spent. Join the club. Damn right, join the club. Thank you so much, robztv.com, for that 5-star review. And I'm going to hand the next review off to Travis because we got another 2-star review.
We did. Yeah. This comes to us from Cool Ghoul on Apple Podcasts. Cool Ghoul says, this could be a great show. 2 stars. I was looking for a new podcast and found GenreVision. Scrolling through the episodes, it seemed apparent that the hosts had near identical tastes in film as me. I was skeptical because there are tons of B-movie podcasts that exist only to make fun of the films or enjoy them in a hipster ironic way. But I was pleasantly surprised to hear that the hosts, Drew and Travis, genuinely love these mostly forgotten genre films and actually have something to say about them. The hosts have great chemistry and offer insightful commentary and analysis while still remaining lighthearted and fun without snark. As someone who genuinely enjoys trashy comic book horror and action movies from the 80s and 90s, I would have given this podcast a 5-star recommend. But I can't. Now, this review is long enough that we can't actually go on and review the whole thing because it would take minutes upon minutes. But I will resume later on in the review. Cool Ghoul says, it seems to come mostly from Travis. I went back and listened to older episodes before Travis joined the show, and it's apparent Drew and Nick were just movie lovers that enjoyed talking about movies and not laughably shoehorning postmodern present-day cultural and societal issues into their conversations. That said, when Travis isn't reciting passages from his collectivist woke Bible, he is also capable of offering interesting insight and analysis. It's a shame, because this podcast could have been great.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much, Cool Ghoul, for leaving a review and clearly listening to enough of the show to, create a fully cogent review about it.
Yeah, he's clearly listened to many hours of GenreVision and the Drew reviews, and that's great.
I hope Cool Ghoul is listening right now.
He also said a bunch of good stuff about the show and both of us, so thank you.
Yes, but unfortunately, Travis's collectivist woke Bible has been broken open too many times.
Yeah,
at just that wording. I recommend people go read Cool Ghoul's review, but honestly, like, I genuinely want to thank Cool Ghoul for leaving a review like that and pointing this stuff out and having a fully honest opinion. Like,
yeah. And honestly, it would have been easier to just leave a 1-star opinion that said like, oh, liberal trash or whatever. And plenty of people could have done that.
or just leave a 1-star thing and not say anything. And
Yeah.
just, I appreciate hearing from Cool Ghoul. I hope they're listening to this, and I hope they keep listening to the show.
Even if they do have to hear me thumb through the pages of my collectivist woke Bible from
Yes.
time to time.
But thank you. I mean, honestly, we've read negative reviews on this show before, and we will do it again. We just want reviews left on the Apple Podcast Store, because these things truly do help the show out. You guys have no idea how helpful getting some kind of consistent level of reviews can really, really help GenreVision become bigger and better than it is right now. So, thanks to Cool Ghoul, thanks to robztv.com. And if you want to be as cool as they are, leave a review on the Apple Podcasts and a rating. Rate it on Spotify. If you do leave a written review, we'll feature it here on the show.
If you want to be even cooler, you can go to patreon.com/GenreVision and pay $5 a month there to access hours upon hours upon hours of bonus material for the show, including behind the scenes content, monthly currently consuming sessions, pre-shows for every single episode of GenreVision, and much, much more.
All right, let's do some currently consuming.
Num 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 num.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Well, I was planning on watching it, and we really didn't have any huge rush to watch it. I wasn't I have to have a take on this, but one of our listeners asked if we would talk about Ghostbusters Afterlife on the show. So I felt the need to watch it a little bit sooner than I had wanted to and talk about it, because you all deserve to hear the scoop on our thoughts on Ghostbusters Afterlife. Now, it's just me. It's not going to be you who watched Ghostbusters Afterlife.
No, I mean, I'm gonna let you go, but I'm just gonna say this: I've not watched Ghostbusters Afterlife, and to the person that was inquiring about that, I really don't want to see it. Everything that I've heard and read about it and know about it, it just doesn't interest me. But I haven't seen the movie, so I can't make a full judgment call on it. So I hand that over to you, Travis.
Yeah. So Ghostbusters Afterlife it's not horrible. It's a real movie. It's an actual movie with, decent filmmaking going on at the helm, by Jason Reitman. Obviously it should be said that Ivan Reitman, may he rest in peace. His recent passing is, certainly casting the film in a different light. I actually watched it before he passed away, but, the fact that this is an actual movie and not some sort of cheap imitation or some sort of crass, reappropriation of the property. It was okay, all right. I can see that there's at least some level of care taken here, into making a movie that actually feels like a real thing. And it's in little stuff. It's not having too many shitty green screen driving scenes. It's oh, this feels real. The fact that it wasn't trying to be a Ghostbusters 2 or a Ghostbusters 3, it was actually kind of trying to do its own thing. And the unfortunate thing is its own thing appears to be how can we cast the first Ghostbusters in a reverent light, the most reverent light? And that is, I think, a little bit of trouble, a little bit troublesome, a little bit annoying for folks like us who look at Ghostbusters as this highly irreverent slobs versus snobs movie. And it's well, can you recapture that? No, I don't think you can, because they tried with Ghostbusters 2 and that movie is not a full success. Instead, what this movie ends up being, what I was kind of pleased to figure out that it was it's kind of it's not quite a Stranger Things riff. It's more along the lines of I hesitate to say Goonies, but it's a scary stories to tell in the dark. It's a teenager's adventure movie kind of thing. It's actually legitimately embracing that structure and having a fun time with it. There is some crass sequelization commercialism stuff that I really dislike about it. The whole scene in the Walmart with the mini Stay Puffs. I'm this ain't it, Chief. Or the rote reusage of a lot of the same elements, hey, Zool comes back.
Yeah, I mean,
so does Gozer and
terror dogs and things like that. Where it's
does Vince Clortho. Yeah, it's
just
all...
again. I've not seen the movie, but all of this just reeks of this. We have to make our kids play with our toys.
Yes, that's basically what it was too. And Jason Reitman and Gil Kennan, the guy who wrote Monster House, or I think directed Monster House.
I think he's got a directing credit. He also made that City of Light or City of Ember movie. I think that's him.
Forgot about that. But anyway, Gil Kenan and Jason Reitman basically admitted to like taking a whole bunch of Ghostbusters toys and like hanging out at like the Ghostbusters corporate headquarters that they've built with all the, you know, props and like, this is how we're going to stage the scenes. It's like the movie feels so reverent of Ghostbusters that it's almost achingly saccharine in a lot of ways. But in reality, it's not a horrible movie. It's just not something that does what Ghostbusters does in the same way. It features a lot of the same elements, but it wants to cast them in the most reverent and sentimental light it can. And that is a little offensive to me, but it's not a big deal. Ultimately, it's like, yeah, this is a real movie. Like the worst thing it could have done is just be like a crass commercial attempt at resurrecting the property. But it's a lot more heartfelt than that. I was pleased to find out.
I mean, that was the biggest selling point, is like, it's the most heartfelt Ghostbusters thing we could make.
Sure.
And again, I bristle against being reverent of something irreverent.
Yeah. Like, and you had said, I think in our Discord chat that you're like, it seems like a movie with its sole purpose is autofellatio, and I was like, man. And I come up with a zinger there. I was like, well, the original is like a slobs versus snobs comedy, and you're sounding a little bit snobby right now. Don't you want to be on the side of the slobs? Like, if you were a true slob, you just watch the fucking thing.
Yeah,
but
eat the slop, you consumer. This is what a slob movie is now. It's it's
not slop though. It's not like super lazy. It's not a super lazy movie. It did some stuff that surprised me. I don't think you would enjoy it ever.
Well, the thing is, like, because I've read a plot summary, I've seen stuff from the movie, and what it seems is like essentially it is kind of doing its own thing, and then when the third act comes around, it's like, all right, get all the toys out.
Yes, exactly.
Like get every little Ghostbusters thing that people will react to, and it's just this is part of that, like the Force Awakenings thing still happening with movies where with these kinds of properties where it's like, just get every little thing out so people can, it's just a movie that seems tailor-made for people to keep doing the Rick Dalton pointing at the TV meme for every 5 seconds. It's like, look, there it is.
Oh, it's that thing I know and love. It didn't want to take any risks on coming up with a whole bunch of new stuff. That's the way that these movies are successful now, is they really don't take they don't take storytelling risks.
Well, what's so weird that's so weird specifically for the Ghostbusters franchise. Every sequel has done that in some way, where it's like they cannot help but owe themselves to the original in such foundational ways. It's like, well, I don't feel like you're actually doing anything really different with the property. Like, no one's actually made something to this point that I've seen where it's like, that feels like a really cool direction to take the Ghostbusters franchise that doesn't feel like anything that necessarily has to harken back to the original.
I mean, to like Paul Feig's credit, it was content in taking things in a different direction.
Yeah, but structurally that movie's a remake. Like,
sure, it is. Absolutely, it is a remake, but like it doesn't feature the same antagonists, and
no,
the character dynamics are a little bit different. And it's like, okay,
but if you strip away the Ghostbusteriness of it and compare it to the original, it's like it's like people being like, oh, the Force Awakens is just A New Hope. It's like, yeah, that's the Ghostbusters remake. Is Ghostbusters literally remade?
Yeah,
like a lot of the surface stuff is totally, like, looks totally different, is totally different. But all right, we got to start by investigating a ghost in an old place. Like, it's not a library this time. It's
these are all familiar things. But like, what I was surprised, or at least pleasantly surprised to see, is like one of the things I really disliked the most, and probably the thing I did dislike the most about the 2016 Ghostbusters remake, was Paul Feig's direction was so artless and uninspired, and the movie looked so bad to my eyes that I was like, please, there's got to be something better than this. And I was like, from a technical standpoint, Jason Reitman makes a much better movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, but I won't disagree with that. But it also just looks, it's got that like J.J. Abrams Super 8.
It looks like Dan Mendel shot it, kind of.
Yeah, it just looks like very fake. I'm not doubting their actual reverence for Ghostbusters, but it just comes across as like somebody coming in is like, what's the most serious we could take Ghostbusters visually? Let's do that.
No, I in that sense, I think the most serious you can take Ghostbusters visually is the first movie.
No, because I this could be a whole thing because I've seen the proton packs. Like there's so many hero shots of the proton packs in the footage that I've seen from Afterlife. And I don't think they even get a close up in the first movie.
They don't, no, but I mean, like once those things like become popular, then you can kind of like pornify them and like, oh, it's an object of art, like to be worshipped. And yes, people get off on it.
Yes. And again, it's just like, I don't need to see like proton packs looking like they're being cast in an Apple commercial. Like it's like just this it's like, let's run through the fields of grain with our proton packs. It's like, that's a weird, like, I'm not saying that happens, but that's like the mentality. It's like Terrence Malick's Ghostbusters.
It's like, not that at all, but like you haven't seen the movie, so you wouldn't know.
But because Terrence Malick, the specific thing is that
just because there's wheat fields doesn't
well,
mean
no,
it's
about because there is supposed to be some sense of reverence and holiness to those particular images. And that's so much of what I get from everything that I've seen from Ghostbusters Afterlife. And that's just immediately a position that's repellent to me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can understand that. And I know you won't like it at all. So I certainly won't recommend it to you, but I mean, if it sounds like it's up your alley, listener, then by all means, rent it. And that's all I got. So, what's been on your plate?
Well, I watched, the new Jean-Pierre Jeunet film, Big Bug, that's available on Netflix now. I haven't stuck with Jeunet. I haven't seen like all of his filmography. I don't know what the most recent film he's made that I've seen.
Last thing I saw from him was Micmacs.
Yeah, I didn't see Micmacs. I didn't see. Did he do Very Long Engagement?
He did.
Yeah, I didn't see that.
I did.
How was that?
It's been so long since I've seen it that I probably wouldn't be able to give you an accurate read on it as far as my feelings, but I liked it back when I saw it when I was 19.
Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing very good things about it and being intrigued, but I never pulled the trigger. Because I like him as a filmmaker, and we've done a couple of his movies on here. Go listen to Alien Resurrection, the City of Lost Children, Delicatessen. And Big Bug looked very much to my, talking about reverence. It's like, oh, thank goodness, something that's very irreverent. And it felt, especially being on the Netflix platform, being like, oh, this could have been done as a Black Mirror episode. And it would have been like, really, I'm sure in some variation it has been that I can't remember, but that show is, so po-faced about these kind of ideas where it's like, it's Jean-Pierre Jeunet.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's going to have a ball with this. And it's an extremely hyper movie in its pacing and its performance. It's a wonderfully set movie. It's the premise being that there's this, that in the future, and it's I like that. It's like, this isn't supposed to be what the future really will be.
Mm.
I like that. It's like, we're not trying for accuracy here.
It looks to me like the Wachowski Street Racer a bit.
Somewhat. I mean, well, because there's this big kind of 50s aesthetic that is supposed to be, that was the dawn of, different types of home technology.
Modern convenience.
Yes. Yeah. Creating this idea of how perfect your life can be thanks to machines.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this is. I mean, it's the point where, they have different robot servants that perform different tasks. There's some wonderful physical robots in this movie. They actually build them, and I'm sure there's CGI enhanced or whatever, but there's some things in here it's like, oh, look at that prop, I want to touch it.
Yeah. When I saw that in the trailer, I was like, ooh, that's really cool looking.
Yeah, and they get play. It's not like little one-off things. And there's good emotional through lines through it, but the idea being that these people are together in a house for different reasons, and when one of them goes to leave, the AI will not let them leave because the danger level outside has exceeded a certain point. So they're locking them in for their safety. And what's happening is this one brand of robots and artificial intelligence called Yonixes, which are these like very RoboCop looking assembly line. They all have the same face thing, are realizing that maintaining control of humanity is, going to mean curbing a lot of their rights and taking over and stuff. So it's a big robot AI Skynet takeover. And of course the people are all flabbergasted that this could even happen. It's quite funny. It wasn't like a laugh riot, but it's got that Jeunet sense of humor that I really like. It's goofy. It's got some fun. There's a plot line where two characters are continually trying to have sex, but they keep getting interrupted, or they can't do it because there's some other update with the robot uprising, and all that's very funny. It's just under 2 hours, and I think it could be even shorter. I think this could be like a 95-minute movie. I think it pumps up a couple of sections with stuff that makes it drag early on. But once it's going on, it's basically just a bunch of people trying to figure out, like, how do we get out of this house, and continually getting updates on how the robot uprising is going. It's fun. It's got some great, one of the best sci-fi ideas is that there are these giant floating billboards that go down streets every day, and it's a woman's face looking directly into the camera. And when it passes by you, it's able to recognize exactly who you are. So it's like, and what's going on in the moment. So it's like, oh, are you feeling a little low? Why don't you try our new energy drink, Sam? Like, and I'm like, that's great. Like, it's really, really funny.
It reminds me of that moment in Minority Report. Yeah, where Ethan Anderton is walking past the Aquafina ads in the subway station. It's like, drinking Aquafina, Ethan Anderton. Yeah.
It's obviously talking about personalized ads, but this one is that, like, this giant luminous billboard comes by their window like every night with a woman's face looking in at you. It's like, hey, do you want to buy this? Like, it's really
that's like an extreme amplification of the blimp in Blade Runner. That's like, the off-world colonies.
Yep, exactly.
But I mean, again, billboard. This seems like a billboard that's almost hunting you down. That's a funny thing.
Well, and I mean, this one, because obviously whatever recognition they have, that they can talk to you specifically and see exactly what's going on with you. It's like, yeah, Minority Report, that's played for tension, because it's like, I don't want anybody to know who I am right now. But in this, it's absolutely, it's played for, like, every moment that a character is, like, flummoxed or frustrated, that fucking thing comes by. It's like, hey, are you having problems on the toilet? Like, whatever. It's
I
like,
didn't see this. This sounds fun.
It's fun. I liked it. Again, it's a little over long. I like also where it ends. Like, this is not a big, like, Rage Against the Machine movie. It actually kind of comes to a point where it's like, yeah, we just got to accept this. Because like, this is the world we made for ourselves, and how we're how we are willing to degrade ourselves to have comfort with this kind of technology, and how we're ceding so much control of our lives over to this technology. Again, ideas that have been done seriously, but in this, seeing it like Gene's particular bent, it makes it really fun, and there's just really fun. He's still got it in terms of those energetic sequences. It looks okay. It's not great. Like, the digital look sometimes does kind of, it kind of betrays itself a bit, but it's not a bad looking movie. And I love the sets that they had to make for this house, because it pretty much takes place all in this one house. So it's like, oh, look at this beautiful physical set where things are moving and interacting, and like, it's great. I really had a fun time with it, and I recommend anybody, if that sounds interesting, to check out Big Bug on Netflix. Well, we will be concluding Genre Romance Month next week with Doppelganger, or as it's known around these parts, Gerdop, which I'm sure we will have to explain in the episode.
If you want to know why we call it Gerdop, go to YouTube and look up the trailer for this movie. It's Drew Barrymore's Doppelganger. From, what 91 was it? 93? 93. Anyway, that's the movie we're talking about next week. I'm so excited to talk about it because the trailer looks fun and features the word Gerdop in one of the shots of the trailer, which sent Drew and I into paroxysms of laughter.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing it because it looks trashy. So
yeah, I hope it ends the month on a high note. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next week
when I read from my collectivist woke Bible. Right here on GenreVision.